Welcome to the Toronto Debating Society on October 11th, 2011. My name is Bridget Lee, and I'll be the speaker for tonight. The debate topic for this evening is Humanity is on a path to peaceful coexistence. For the motion, please help me welcome Dean, our Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the opposition. Humanity is on a path to peaceful coexistence. Firstly, we define humanity as, in this case, democratically elected governments and representatives. On a path is making a collective, active choice towards nonviolence, and peaceful coexistence is the sharing of resources and power to the benefit of all. Now, humans have been and continue to be violent creatures by nature, who have moved from tribal societies in ancient times, fighting over land and resources to protect their plot of land, protect their food supply, their water supply, and the individuals within their society, through time to being ruled by kings and emperors, or who held individual power, representing the collective, but individual, all-powerful, omnipotent kings, or queens, or emperors, whose rule was law and decisions were final. There still was an interest in fighting over land and resources, and particularly power. That was the important aspect of that time period. And through time, it continued to democracies. Now, humanity is not at an equal state all across the world. There are various levels of, in quotes, civilization as far as the democratic process goes. And people continue to develop and learn the processes of becoming part of a greater society and trying to benefit all the members of their communities. This democracy, or this democratic setup, is moving towards peaceful coexistence. And it is doing so by way of sharing the resources, sharing the power, and it is not complete and it is not final. And people would argue, in fact, the opposition may argue, well, that's lovely to say and it's great in theory, but in practice it doesn't work. But again, it is a continuum. This is not the final stage. The final stage may not come for years, but the definition, rather the motion is that humanity is on a path to peaceful coexistence. It doesn't say it will be peacefully coexisting by 2015. And we have to keep that in mind. We have discovered as a society at large that resources on the earth are finite. The water, the air, the land, the food, and even oil have limitations. And with an ever-increasing population on the planet, compared to thousands of years ago, we would say, in fact, that fewer people are getting killed in wars and conflicts today, in a relative sense, than in the past. According to the Toronto Star this past Saturday, World War II was apparently the third or fourth most violent conflict within relatively recent times, whereas in China, millions of people were killed by their own government for the sake of whatever the emperor decided. So we are suggesting, and in fact stating, that the peaceful coexistence is moving forward and not backward. My colleague will talk about the effect of social media in present-day societies and how it is working to bring democratic issues and awareness to people all around the world and keeping it in the forefront whereas communications in the past were limited or non-existent to a large extent. Today, it's an opportunity to encourage communication, encourage growth, and encourage development, not only within communities, but between communities. And we are suggesting that these democratically elected governments work together, are working together, in fact, towards a more peaceful coexistence than has existed in the past. And the opposition may bring up the issues of Israel and Palestine, or the fact that the United Nations is relatively powerless when it comes to various issues because of the background politics. But ladies and gentlemen, firstly, the start of the United Nations was in good faith after the war to encourage communications. And again, we did not say that the United Nations will have peace within the world by 2015. We are saying that it is a venue for communicating, hashing out problems, and airing disagreements between nations, between peoples, to the extent that is possible to encourage peaceful coexistence and development of the world. There will always be disagreements and there will always be inequality. Again, as I said, humans, we are violent creatures by nature, we are greedy creatures by nature, but it is working together and we learn that in fact we are better able to survive collectively into the future if we do work together rather than working apart. And the issue of power, again, is still present, even in a democratically elected government or society. The issue of power still holds because there is always a minority voice that has to be heard. And that is the purpose of the democratically elected government, is to ensure that the minority is heard so that people are aware of other perspectives. And this is the way to work towards peaceful coexistence. They say good fences make good neighbors. And indeed, there are fences, there are differences, there are barriers. But that is not necessarily an example or proof that people are arguing. It is rather an opportunity to peacefully coexist in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Our next debater is the leader of the opposition who will speak against the motion for 7 minutes with warning bell at 6 minutes. Please help me welcome Dean. Oh, Michael.
Dean, you're on again. Thank you. He could definitely use a second chance. But anyway. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, being in the opposition in a debate is like being a parent of young children. They give us their meat and we're supposed to cut it into digestible pieces. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we weren't given too much meat tonight. Maybe a little bit of meat substitute, maybe a nice chunk of tofu, but I didn't hear one example to prove their point. Not one. Ladies and gentlemen, just to talk about a few things, the government has made it a rather interesting debate by limiting the debate to democratically elected people. Well, that eliminates 98% of history and 95% of the world. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure we're going to totally accept that. A country that is democratically elected is already a good distance towards the continuum of, and therefore, limiting the debate to people that are already maybe moving in that direction eliminates most of humanity, and which we cannot accept. Also, if I'm not mistaken, it was a lengthy definition, but I believe that they centered around people who made a choice to peaceful existence. I believe that was a word in the definition. Ladies and gentlemen, we are not here and shouldn't be here to talk about choices. We're here to only talk about action. Who cares what's in their mind? It's what they do that matters. So that's what we're going to talk about. Not what some government might choose to do, but in fact what they do. Thank you for pointing out that resources are finite. That, of course, has been the cause and will continue to be a cause of many wars. Again, they talked about the UN started in good faith. So do most marriages. We know how a lot of those end up. We don't have a lot more to refute because there just wasn't much to get our, but we do have a lot of points of our own which I want to get into. Ladies and gentlemen, even the dullest student of history who has looked at all of recorded history would look that the warfare is as natural to all forms of living life as the very act of breathing. Ever since recorded history, ever since the first caveman bludgeoned his neighbor so he could steal a piece of his firewood, the history of the world is nothing but the history of warfare. At least 1/3 of the countries on this planet have been at war, or are soon to go to war, or just were at war since recorded history began. There has never been a period when at least a dozen countries in the world weren't hard at it, fighting and trying to kill each other. We've had 100,000 years of our recorded life to achieve this, and at a time when life was a lot simpler, they couldn't do it then, and we didn't receive any proof that it's going to happen now. Ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the animal roots. We have evolved from and are in fact mammals. If you look at all of the mammal world, and let's not limit it to mammals, let's talk about the birds, let's talk about the ants, the reptiles, insects, every form of life, even a amoeba in a test tube will go after each other trying to kill each other. Our whole immune system is based on killing cells, and also bad ones. We are animals, and as such, we betray our animal roots with repeated regularity. What do all organisms fight over? Not just animals, but certainly humans. Territory, mating rights. Have you been to a bar fight recently? Food, hunting, territory, strategic locations, a river, a mountain, a pass that they could control, raw resources, and water. This is what all living organisms have fought over, and you tell me which one of those still isn't on the list, but we will always be fighting over. All life forms, forgetting about animals, all life forms are in a constant, you've seen the documentaries on PBS, they are nothing but ant colonies are constantly in war. Bee colonies are the workers and the fighters. Forget about humans. We like to think we're better than other mammals, but ladies and gentlemen, I could give you proof for a week here that you can't prove to me that we are better than any other life form. We kill each other with impunity in unbelievably inhuman numbers. You look at the countries of the world, every one of them was formed through warfare, and every one of them has changed through warfare. You look at the map, I looked at a map of a geographical history of the world. The map of the world from a couple thousand years ago bears no relationship to the existence of what's the map. I mean, even when we were kids, the sun never set on the British Empire. Well, boy, it sure is setting now. The map has changed, and it always will because of warfare, because of the things that I listed. People and all life forms have fought and will continue to fight forever. Let's talk about, the government suggests we're on a path. Well, that suggests a direction that we're moving towards. Did you hear one example to prove that we are moving in a positive direction? I could give you 1,000. And if they came up with one, I could come up with 10 for every one that they came up with. They didn't give one example of where a country or even did they give us a peace? Did they talk about the Middle East? Well, they can't do that. They talk about North, no, can't talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a bloodlust that even this ultimate fighting which is coming along. It's disgusting. Man has a lust. If you watched a hockey game recently, the hockey players are being beaten. They're actually dying and becoming mentally ill. Who cares? Don Cherry sure as hell doesn't. Ladies and gentlemen, the last thing I want to talk about is religion. Religion has been at the forefront of many, not most, at least half of these wars. The Crusades, the 100 Years' War, Northern Ireland, Middle East, India, Pakistan. Most of the wars have been based on religion. Religion hasn't gone away, ladies and gentlemen. We are continuing. What a sick bunch of people that fight not for territory, but because someone else believes something different than we do. And we'll kill people because of that. but we think we are better than other life forms. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been fighting since recorded history, and we haven't heard one shred of proof that that is on the wane. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Our next debater is the seconder from the government's position. For the next 5 minutes, he will refute Michael's arguments and add his own, if you may wish. Please help me welcome Jen.
I don't know this thing works. I just have to wing it. Ladies and gentlemen, well, I'm glad the leader of the opposition got up here and exposed all of his rubbish arguments to everyone here. Where do I start? First, let me oppose the leader of the opposition, because they're far easier to deal with when getting into our arguments on the government side. What the leader of the opposition is trying to do, and probably the opposition in general, is prove that we are really just maggots. We're just voracious people, individually and communally, who just want to kill, maim, steal, take as much as we can. It is our contention, ladies and gentlemen, that yes, that did happen. Now, as the world moves towards a more civilized society, and the quote here is, what is the one defining aspect of humanity? It's civilization. In the past, sure, civilization meant raping and pillaging whoever came close to your resources, or your women, or whatever it was that you were trying to protect. Or if you wanted more land or more resources, you went after them and you killed them. Yes, sure. Now we're in a situation where there are international governments, there are international agreements, there are people that talk to each other. This is what the government is saying. We are now in a civilized society, civilized country, civilized world, where people are elected to represent us, and if those people decide that they want to go to war, we, the people who elect them, may decide that we don't want them to. And I'll get on to the social media aspect of that later. The leader of the opposition mentioned that at any given time there's dozens of wars going on. Can he name more than 3 wars that are going on in the world right now? The fact is, there are far less wars happening now than there were in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and far less wars going on than there were back in the ancient times. So there is less going on. We do not say that war is never going to happen. What we're trying to say is that humanity, in a form of governments of the people, is heading towards less war and a more peaceful coexistence, as the Prime Minister pointed out. The leader of the opposition, well, obviously where he's coming from is not where the government's coming from. He used the idea of, when was the last time you'd been in a bar fight? Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've never been in a bar fight. I've never wanted to be in a bar fight, because I feel that if someone's in a bar fight, then they can go off and do it. But obviously the leader of the opposition knows more about bar fights than I do. So he then says every country in the world is being formed and changed through warfare. Well, no, this isn't so, ladies and gentlemen. Just look at the European Union, for example. How many of those countries, after the fall of communism, came about through warfare? None. They all peacefully migrated to stable democratic societies through the ages of the European Union. So, no, what the leader of the opposition is saying is rubbish. This is not the way of the world now. It's the way of the world, and it might well be the way of the opposition, but it is not the way the world is tending towards. So, my point is, where are all these conflicts? Yes, you'll have Somalia. You'll have maybe Israel and the Palestinians. It isn't a war at the moment. But against that, you will have situations like the Arab Spring. You will have places even like Burma, which is called Myanmar, which is now heading off to a far more civilized and peaceful coexistence. I don't have much time. So, ladies and gentlemen, the social media that I was going to talk about brings about the environment where people can discuss between themselves and they do not have to accept the leader's position where they go. This is a far more democratic process where you have things like the Arab Spring was brought about, which will lead to far more peace than there was before. You have the Chinese population that is texting each other to bring about social change. You have the Wall Street people and people in Tel Aviv who are standing up and saying, we don't like this, we don't like the way it's government, but it's peaceful. They are not out there raping and pillaging, they are not out there taking over someone else's land because they are no longer, as the opposition states, just people out there wanting a fight. Ladies and gentlemen, yes, we believe that humanity is heading on a path towards peaceful coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Our next debater is Gerry, the seconder from the opposition team.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the government. I'm first going to give you 3 points of rebuttal, and then I'm going to introduce some arguments of my own, and at the same time back up many of the points that my learned colleague has made. First of all, the Prime Minister, in his talk, compared at one point China to the countries, I believe, after World War II, or the number of people that were lost in China in ancient times to the people in World War II. But at the same time, I thought he was talking about democratically elected people. And it seems to me that Italy, Germany, Japan, who are the opposition to in the Second World War, they were not democratic. So I don't know how we can pull that in as a comparison when he supposedly was talking about democratically elected government. So that doesn't wash from my point of view. A second point that the Prime Minister talked about was the United Nations being set up in good faith. Well, there seems to be lots of good faith in the world. But where has that good faith gone? And I would suggest nowhere. I'm going to talk more about that in my own arguments. But why has it gone nowhere? Because of man's nature. It is not our nature to be peaceful. And this is something that my colleague spent a long time talking about. Man is an animal. We are not essentially peaceful people. Perhaps we can learn that someday, but I don't see it happening right now. The member of the government still has not given us any examples. Neither of the government people so far have given us any factual examples of countries or areas that we can see going the right path to peaceful coexistence. Instead, we have all of these places in the world throughout history that seem to be going nowhere. Now, 3 wars. The Middle East, I believe, is still a pretty heavy conflict. Afghanistan is not exactly very peaceful. Central Africa, pretty bad. And essentially, Al-Qaeda and all of its aims and conflicts, that would seem to be a war against non-Muslim people, unless I have that wrong. The member of the government also talked about Israel in the social media in Israel. Well, if I was to ask people right now, is Israel at peace or not? I'm sure I would get 99 people saying no, not, and maybe one, maybe Jim would say yes. But for all the things that social media purports to do, I don't think it's made a shred of difference. I'm going to go on and talk about my arguments now. The first argument is one that my colleague has spent a little bit of time talking about, and that is the huge stress and pressure that population increase is causing in the world. This is essentially the same reason that Hitler gave for his beginning of the Second World War. he called it Lebensraum, I believe. Today, we have, what, twice, 2.5 times as many people? The stresses and pressure on humanity are not leading us to peaceful coexistence. Instead, there are untold stresses and pressures on our resources, on room to live, on everything. A second argument. There have been many attempts at treaties, a treaty would seem to indicate, ah, great, you're on the path to coexistence, to peace. Anwar Sadat tried that. Where did that path lead? He was assassinated. JFK, RFK, Martin Luther, all were peaceful people, all got assassinated. Getting on the path to peaceful coexistence doesn't seem to lead anywhere except to death. John Lennon, Imagine All the People, beautiful song, killed. Yugoslavia, Israel, Liberia, all created countries, all with terrible results. TV shows, cartoons, vampire shows, sci-fi, cop shows, reality, this is what's on TV. Violence is popular. Peace does not sell. Man is a violent creature. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerry. We have now come to the second part of our debate, where the leaders of both teams will give their final comments. Please welcome Michael. Michael.
I'm aversion to I'm going to come up here anyway. Okay, I got to push this button. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's cut the government a little slack. They only had 10, 12 minutes to prepare, and considering that, they did. Well, it was okay. So, how the government can suggest that the European map was created through peace is a callous and blatant disregard of even the most basic truth in history. I was in Finland recently. They've been overrun so many times they don't even know what language to speak. They were once, the Russians fought the Swedes once. Where did they fight? In Finland, because it was more convenient. I was in Hungary last year. The history is impossible to comprehend between the Turks and the Ottoman Empire and the Russians, and I mean, it's just, anyway. All the government had to prove tonight is that we're on a path towards peace. They didn't even, they don't even have to prove that we're going to have peace, just that we're on a path, and they couldn't even do that. I think they trivialized the debate by limiting the discussion to democratically elected. I think that, and they didn't even stick to it anyways. They totally confused the issue, and I think should be penalized for framing a debate in terms of choices, which is in their definition, as opposed to actions, which we choose to talk about. People have been fighting forever. Our animal roots are living. Religion will make it difficult for there ever to be peace. The history of humanity is the history of warfare. Ladies and gentlemen, we are realists, not optimists. If you're a realist, you have to vote for us. If you're a romantic optimist and don't need any facts, I guess there's your choice.
Thank you, Michael. And now to conclude the debate, we have Dean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The opposition has attempted to show that we have trivialized or frivolous arguments and the like. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have stated, in fact, that humanity is on a path to peaceful coexistence. And we have indicated that, again, the path is not a destination, it's a path, it's a method, it's a process of getting to the destination. And the issues raised by the opposition, apparently they can't see the forest for the trees. Civilization, which is happening through democratically elected governments and progressing through what was the heathen years of ancient civilizations to more civilized civilizations, that is what civilizes people towards peace. That's what encourages people towards peace. And again, it doesn't make them have peace immediately. It makes them work towards it. So Martin Luther King and JFK, though they were killed, were working towards peace. It's a process. And in fact, there is a choice involved. You choose to take an action. You don't act because of whatever. The only reason you act is if lightning strikes over here and you run over there because you're scared. You still did make a choice, because I don't want to be fried by the lightning. Ladies and gentlemen, peaceful coexistence is the choice that humans who are, by nature, violent, make every day. The bar fights you talk about, my colleague doesn't participate in them by choice. And that is the purpose, ladies and gentlemen, is that it is on a path to peaceful coexistence. That is the microcosm of society at large. Countries that work together, as we have said, towards peace through the United Nations, through other agencies and organizations, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, humans may not be peaceful people in essence, but ladies and gentlemen, they work towards it through their daily lives.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. We have now come to the part where the adjudicator, Dave, will give his comments on debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, just to echo a couple of the comments that were just mentioned a few moments ago off camera, that this is a very challenging position to be put in, especially for the government, where the topic is announced with only a few minutes to spare, and you're really trying to scrape everything together at the last minute. So yes, excellent job for volunteering to put together that debate. Okay, first of all, I'm going to talk about the different areas in which I scored this debate. So, of course, this was about whether or not humanity is on a peace to war. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the definition. The definition restricted the word humanity to democratically elected governments. And the first thing that said to me was that citizens of non-democratically elected governments are not human or subhuman. And that did not sit well with me, and it did not sit well with the opposition, who rightfully said, sorry, that's far too restrictive, and I agreed with that. So when Michael came up and said that definition is trash, we're not going to accept it, I agreed, and I thought they did a good job providing out the reasons for why they disagreed.
I didn't say trash, and I didn't say we wouldn't accept it, just for the record.
Fair enough. We have the tape to say exactly what was on there, but needless to say, the definition was rejected. The next thing is that a lot of the arguments came down to talking about resources and the world map, and then a category which I'm calling anomalies. First of all, the fact that the resources were brought up first by the government, that we have resources, therefore we have more reasons to share resources, and that puts us on a path to peaceful coexistence. And the opposition comes around and says, well, actually, it's the strain on resources that is a huge problem and is an increasing cause for war. And then the next part about the world map, about whether or not the world map is being shifted around by peace or by war. Excellent examples from the government about the European Union, that, look, this is actually a good reason. The United Nations, whether or not that is something that has something that's extremely beneficial, like the opposition tried to point out. So really contentious there, and actually no clear winner on who won the world map cause. And anomalies, basically this is where I come down to the United Nations again and the discussion on the bar fights. Like, bar fights was used to say, well, look, humanity is violent, and the government comes back and says, well, actually, the bar fights are the anomaly, and it's a choice to avoid bar fights. And at the same time, the opposition talks about, well, the UN is an anomaly that basically is not very helpful or functional, so it's still not helpful. So these are pretty interesting areas where the debate came down to. In general, I found the government's arguments were disjointed. It was difficult for me to follow how many arguments you had and exactly what they were. And actually, when the government seconder came up, a lot of the arguments were out of bounds based on your own definition. So I interpret that as you've accepted the opposition's decapitation of your resolution, and I allowed them anyway. So there we go. To the opposition, very nicely, neatly organized arguments. I could actually tell how many you had, and I could find that they were relevant to the resolution. So nicely organized and clear, and a good continuum of arguments from the opposition sides. On the content side, there was not very much content or examples in the opening case from the Prime Minister, and then we had some better examples from the seconder of the government. And although questionable content, because of course this is an impromptu debate, there's no opportunity for research, so with some validation, I'm not sure how many of them would still hold up, but they were there, and we tried it out anyway. And opposition, about even playing field, there were definitely examples, lots to build up your arguments. Not sure how well they would all hold up under pressure, but a little bit better than the government ended up with. Rebuttal and refutation. I found that the government made a lot of mistakes in the rebuttal and refutation section, mainly because they did not attempt to defend their definition or their initial case at all. It went down to the minutiae of exactly what was said. They did rebut against your points, and they did directly talk about what you mentioned in your arguments and points. However, there was no rebuttal about population. There was no rebuttal for a lot of the major points that were brought up. So a big win for the opposition there, because the opposition went across the entire board. They rejected your counter thesis, and they rejected your thesis with their counter thesis, and they rejected individual cases. And in fact, Gerry, your rebuttals were particularly easy to follow, because you came out there and said, I'm rebutting these following points, and rebutted them very cleanly and well, and then you continue with your own arguments. Moving along to our category of teamwork. I found that the teamwork was lacking, and we're coming back to this theme again of the definition. You can see how happy it is, how important it is to get the definition right, because the definition was almost rejected by your partner, that made the teamwork side not work really well. And this I'm going to point out just because it was amusing to me, is that something that I like to say, well, if you were to show that you actually work together is to bring up the points that your seconder is about to bring up. And I was so happy when I finally heard something about social media, because the Prime Minister said, oh, my seconder is going to talk about social media, and oh, he's going to talk about social media. Then Jim, you got up and said, I'll talk about social media in a minute, I'll talk about social media in a minute, and thank goodness you actually got around to it. So I did give you points on teamwork for actually talking about the other person's points, even though, Dean, I'm really sure you were just filling time there, and wondering how much you were filling the time.
Dean?
And however, of course, when we came down to the social media, I'm not really sure how much that really counted against the entire debate. But still, good points for teamwork. And opposition to talk about teamwork, not bad teamwork, because you covered a lot of the same kind of points. You talked about the same kind of themes, and it really felt like you came from one unified position. And I know that you both talked to each other before the debate, because that's the only way to make this work. So pretty good for the opposition. Good from the government, although vastly devastated by the lack of coordination with the definition there.
Anything.
Couple of points just at the end here. So Michael, I had to take off a few points for bringing in new arguments during your summation, talking about Finland and Hungary. They do relate to what you were talking about, but I think even you know that you made some rebuttals in the first half of your summation too much. Like when 1 minute bell when you said, anyway, I better talk about my summation. So that was, you had a good presentation in that remaining part, but I would have really liked to see some covering the major points again. Style and rhetoric. Fences make good neighbors. Good quote from the government. Although I found that even though there was some flair and style, it did come across mostly flat from the government side in terms of style. In contrast to the opposition, which actually had a really clear and compelling presentation, talking about the much bigger picture of the animal kingdom, and just the way that you introduced that was very compelling. And a few more things to bring up about style. Gerry, interesting bringing up Hitler and talking about this was his excuse, and Michael talking about how even your own immune system is basically a military. These were really, really interesting pieces of rhetoric. And Jim, we're not just saying we're not just people looking for a fight. I thought that was very good. So interesting pieces of style and rhetoric. In terms of the final scoring for the debate, the opposition has won with a score of 76 to the government's 41. And I did award the best speaker to Michael.
Thank you, James.
41? I want to see where that came from.
And we're now going to have the results for the popular vote.
The results of the popular vote were 7 for the opposition and 1 for the government.
All right.
Bye.